Javier Morales, a renowned surgeon, had faced critical situations in the operating room before, but nothing prepared him for what was to come. Abruptly fired for following his oath and saving the life of a poor child, Javier found himself at the center of a storm. 3 days after his dismissal, while the city still murmured about the events, a line of black cars parked in front of his house without any warning. When he opened the door, Javier could hardly believe his eyes. What could justify that unexpected visit? And what would it mean for the man who had just lost everything? The weight of choices, the redemption of Javier Morales. Javier Morales never imagined that, within hours, his life would change so drastically. San Rafael University Hospital was more than just a workplace. It was where he had built his reputation, where his hands had saved lives, and where he tirelessly dedicated himself to medicine. When he decided to treat a severely ill child without charging anything, he acted in accordance with his deepest principles. The little girl, whose name he only learned after the surgery, had been rushed in by her desperate mother, who had no money. Javier didn't think twice. He knew the healthcare system had its flaws, but there, in front of that small life slipping away, the rules didn't matter. Hours after the procedure, Javier was called to the office of Luis Mendoza, the hospital director. The tension in the air was palpable. Upon entering, he found Mendoza behind the desk, his expression as hard as stone. "Dr. Morales, you directly disobeyed the hospital's policies. We have no room for acts of charity in an institution that is sustained by the paid work of its doctors," Mendoza said bluntly. "I saved a life, Mendoza. A child who wouldn't have had another chance," Javier replied, keeping his voice steady. "That doesn't matter now. Your decision cost the hospital dearly. You are fired, effective immediately." Those words hit Javier like a punch to the stomach. Fired? For saving a child? He tried to process what was happening, but the coldness on Mendoza's face made it clear there was no room for discussion. As he left the hospital, Javier felt a mix of disbelief and anger. He had dedicated his life to medicine, and now, for an act of pure humanity, he was being discarded as if he were expendable. The name that once carried so much weight, at that moment, felt like an anchor dragging him down. The cold breeze of that morning brought with it a disturbing silence as Javier walked through the hospital doors, his hands in the pockets of his coat. He looked at the imposing building that housed years of his dedication and felt a void he had never experienced. The news of his dismissal quickly spread among his colleagues. Many were surprised, some even shocked, but no one dared to confront the administration. Javier, however, was aware that behind closed doors there was a web of interests he had never fully understood. San Rafael Hospital had transformed into something unrecognizable for him. Mendoza, on the other hand, did not hesitate to seal Javier's fate. In the director's mind, the hospital's image came first, and Javier's decision to treat the child without official permission was a direct affront to the authority and rules that kept the institution functioning. When he crossed paths with some doctors he deeply respected, Javier found only silence and indifference. No one was willing to risk their own positions for an act of solidarity. This reality was a punch to the gut, more painful than any words. In the days that followed, Javier couldn't escape the feeling that he had lost more than just his job. He had always believed that the medical oath meant something greater than the policies and regulations of any institution. But now, confronted with the weight of reality, he felt lost. A surgeon without a place, without purpose. Sleepless nights became routine. He replayed the moment of the surgery repeatedly in his mind, each detail etched like a scar. The girl's life was saved, but the price he paid felt unbearably high. The phone, once incessantly busy with calls from patients and colleagues, was now silent. His dismissal had spread like a sentence of isolation, distancing him from everything he knew. Then, on a gray morning, while he unsuccessfully tried to concentrate on a medical book, the doorbell rang. The small room where Javier was sitting seemed to shrink as he stood up, his heart racing. When he opened the door, he was surprised by the elegant figure of Regina Alvarez, the widow of Mayor Francisco Alvarez, who had recently passed away from a heart attack. Regina was impeccably dressed, but her eyes carried the pain of someone who had lost everything. Upon seeing her, Javier immediately knew that this meeting would not be easy. There was something in her gaze that sent a chill down his spine, a mix of sadness and fury that left him uncomfortable. "May I come in?" Regina asked, her voice firm but laden with a latent pain. Javier hesitated for a moment but gestured for her to enter. He led her to the living room, where she sat rigidly in one of the armchairs, holding her purse tightly on her lap, as if clinging to it was the only thing preventing her from falling apart. "I know who you are," Regina began, cutting straight to the point. "You're the surgeon who was fired for disobeying the hospital rules, for saving a child." Javier nodded, trying to find words to respond, but Regina interrupted him before he could say anything. "My husband, Francisco, died because there was no surgeon available in that critical moment. And why? Because you were busy saving a poor child." Her voice trembled, but she maintained control, which made her presence even more intense. Javier felt the impact of her words like a blow. The weight of her accusation was real, and he knew that regardless of the circumstances, her pain was legitimate. He tried to explain, but his voice faltered for a moment. "Mrs. Alvarez, I deeply regret the loss of your husband. There was no way to foresee what would happen that day. The life of that child was in immediate danger, and You saved her, I know," Regina interrupted, her voice now filled with a bitterness that Javier could not ignore. "But at what cost, doctor? My husband died because you decided that one life was more important than another." Javier felt a knot form in his throat. He knew there was no answer that could comfort her, no words that could ease the pain of losing someone so dear. Regina was there not only to confront him, but perhaps also to find some kind of explanation, something she could process amid her grief. "I followed my instinct. I did what I thought was right," Javier finally managed to say, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The decision was difficult, but I could not ignore that child. I understand that nothing I say will bring your husband back, and for that, I am very sorry." Regina fell silent for a moment, analyzing Javier's words as if trying to find some meaning in them. What she wanted, perhaps even she did not know clearly. When she finally spoke again, her voice was more controlled, but still filled with pain. "I loved Francisco, and now he is gone. Nothing can change that. You saved a life, doctor, but to me, you took another. I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive you for that." Javier had nothing more to say. The weight of Regina's loss was something he could not bear. She stood up, not waiting for a response, and walked to the door, pausing briefly. "I hope you can live with the choices you made," she said before leaving Javier alone with his thoughts. The silence that enveloped the house felt overwhelming. Javier felt small, defeated, as if the career and life he had built were crumbling around him in ruins. He could not blame Regina for her resentment. The truth was that he blamed himself. Her words echoed in his mind, each one a sharp knife. As the door closed behind Regina, Javier knew that this encounter would forever change the way he viewed his work, his vocation, and his choices. He had lost more than just his job. He had lost a part of himself, something he might never be able to recover. But what he did not know was that this was only the beginning of a much more painful and complicated journey. Regina Alvarez's visit was the harbinger of a storm he was unprepared to face, a storm that would reveal hidden truths, both about the hospital and about himself, and that would call into question everything he believed to be right. The days that followed brought new complications for Javier. A legal notification informed him that he was being sued for medical negligence, accused of having caused, directly or indirectly, the death of Mayor Francisco Alvarez. The accusation, written in cold legal terms, left him facing a new battle, even more exhausting than the previous one. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension as Javier entered. The sound of his footsteps echoed on the marble floor, amplifying the weight of the situation. He felt the weight of everyone's gaze upon him. The judge, the lawyers, the jurors, all seemed to study him with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Sitting next to his lawyer, a longtime friend, Javier couldn't help but feel the growing sense of isolation that intensified with each passing minute. On the other side, the prosecution's attorney, a middle-aged man with a calculating gaze, began the proceedings with a meticulous presentation of the evidence. He drew a direct line between Javier's decision to treat the child and the lack of assistance available for the mayor. Everything seemed carefully planned to paint Javier as a reckless doctor who had placed his own emotions above professional duty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," began the prosecution's attorney in a grave tone, "what we have here is a clear case of negligence. Dr. Javier Morales, by unilaterally deciding to disobey the hospital rules, deprived our dear mayor of a chance for survival. He acted impulsively, without considering the consequences of his actions." Listening to these words, Javier felt a mix of anger and despair. He wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that he had done what any caring doctor would do, but he knew it wouldn't help. He needed to trust that his lawyer could reveal the truth. His lawyer, a younger and determined man, then stood up, his expression heavy with seriousness. Dr. Morales' decision was not made lightly. He acted in a moment of extreme need, and that is what we will prove. Furthermore, we must remember that a hospital is an institution with resources and professionals to handle multiple emergencies. If Mayor Francisco Alvarez did not receive adequate care, that cannot be placed on the shoulders of a single doctor. As witnesses were called, the tension in the courtroom only grew. Nurses, doctors, and hospital staff provided varied testimonies, some supporting Javier, others seeming more concerned about protecting their own positions. However, the defense had a significant trump card, an old colleague of Javier's who had recently left Hospital San Rafael for personal reasons. This colleague, who had worked directly with Javier in many surgeries, was called to the witness stand by the defense. When he took the stand, there was an air of expectation, as if everyone knew something important was about to unfold. "Dr. Morales has always been one of the most dedicated surgeons I have ever known," he began, looking directly at the jury. "But what the hospital doesn't want you to know is that, on the day the mayor was admitted, the internal communication system was down. I myself tried to call Dr. Morales and other doctors, but I couldn't get through. They were trying to cover this up." The revelation hit the courtroom like a bombshell. Javier, who until then had been unaware of this failure, felt a new wave of anger. He had been kept in the dark, used as a scapegoat by an administration more concerned with protecting its reputation than saving lives. The defense attorney seized the surprise of the revelation to strike back hard. If the system had been functioning, Dr. Morales could have been informed about the mayor's condition, and perhaps we would be here discussing a completely different reality. But the hospital, in its attempt to maintain an impeccable facade, chose to place all the blame on a single man. The testimony and subsequent evidence showed that the hospital had serious management failures and that the mayor's death was not simply a consequence of Javier's decision. These revelations began to change the atmosphere in the courtroom. What had seemed like a case of negligence was now becoming a debate about ethics, institutional responsibility, and the systemic failures that the hospital was trying to cover up. Javier watched, incredulous, as the defense unraveled layers of lies and omissions he had never even imagined existed. The jury, which had initially seemed inclined to convict him, now appeared divided. It was no longer a simple matter of guilt, but of who truly should bear the consequences of a tragedy. The tension increased with each new testimony, each document revealed. The The prosecution attorney tried in vain to refute the new evidence, but the narrative was shifting, and he knew it. The court, once certain of Javier's guilt, now viewed the case in a new light. Javier felt a mix of relief and bitterness. Relief at finally seeing the truth emerge, but bitterness over everything he had gone through, the life of Francisco Alvarez, Regina's anger, and his own career, which, even if he were acquitted, was already tarnished. The trial extended over weeks, but in the end, the revelation of the hospital's systemic failures was enough to turn the tide. Javier's lawyer made his closing argument, urging the jury to consider all the evidence and not to be swayed by an accusation based on false premises. "We are here to seek justice, not to find an easy scapegoat," he concluded, his serious tone silencing the room. When the jury withdrew to deliberate, Javier felt as though he were waiting for a sentence that would define the rest of his life. Hours passed like an eternity. When they finally returned, the atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with expectation. The verdict was read aloud: not guilty. Javier took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. But he knew that although the legal battle had been won, the impact of the past weeks still weighed heavily on his heart. The wounds left by everything that had happened would not be easy to heal, and the shadow of what he had gone through would continue to follow him. However, as the doors of the courthouse opened for him, Javier knew that there was something lurking, something he still couldn't fully see. The truth had come to light, but the life he once knew had changed irrevocably, and the path ahead was filled with uncertainties. The not guilty verdict was a palpable relief for Javier Morales, but the weight of the events did not dissipate with the jury's decision. As he left the courtroom, he was met with a deafening silence, where the expectations of a lifetime collided with the brutal reality of the past months. He had been acquitted, but the emotional cost was immense. The courthouse doors closed behind him, and the feeling of isolation hit him with renewed force. Each step Javier took toward the exit was accompanied by furtive glances and muffled whispers. The case had attracted unwanted attention, turning him into an involuntary public figure. Once a respected surgeon, he was now a man marked by an experience that had torn him apart in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. As he reached the outside, Javier felt the fresh air, but found no comfort. The world he knew had changed, and now he needed to find a way to move forward, even if the path was obscured. His lawyer, loyal to his side throughout the legal battle, touched his shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "You won, Javier. That's what matters now," he said, his tone trying to convey hope, but failing to completely dissipate the darkness that loomed over them. Javier nodded, but the words sounded empty. He knew that although he had won the legal battle, the internal war was just beginning. The figure of Regina Alvarez haunted his thoughts. Even with the truth exposed, the pain of loss she felt continued to gnaw at his soul. "And Regina? What will happen to her now?" Javier finally asked, his voice betraying the concern he tried to hide. His lawyer hesitated before responding. She lost her husband, Javier. Nothing we do or say will change that. She needs to find a way to move on, just like you." These words brought no peace to Javier. Regina's pain was something he carried with him, an open wound that refused to heal. He knew that legal acquittal would not resolve the deeper questions that remained unanswered. In the days that followed the trial, Javier tried to return to normalcy, but the life he once knew felt distant, like a shattered dream. The city, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed filled with ghosts. He avoided places where he used to be recognized, fearing the gaze of others, even knowing that many believed in his innocence. The job offers he thought might arise after the trial did not come. The stain of the trial and the shadow of Mayor Francisco Alvarez's death seemed to follow Javier wherever he went. Hospitals, once eager to seek his services, now hesitated. People, once so confident in Javier's skill and ethics, now viewed him with caution, as if his healing touch had become cursed. Javier spent hours at home, replaying the events that had brought him to this point. Memories of the hospital, the expression on Director Mendoza's face when he fired him, Regina's pained gaze, all felt intertwined in a web he couldn't unravel. He felt trapped in a cycle of guilt and pain, unsure how to break free. Then, on a cloudy afternoon, Javier received a letter. The envelope, made of thick, elegant paper, bore only his name on the front, written in firm, precise handwriting. He hesitated before opening it, fearing the contents, but curiosity proved stronger. Inside there was a formal invitation, sealed with a crest he did not immediately recognize. Upon opening it, Javier was surprised to see that it was an invitation to a private meeting, signed by a familiar name, Regina Alvarez. The designated location was a private residence, away from the city center, in a quiet, isolated area. The invitation didn't provide many details. It simply requested his presence on a specific date, which was just a few days away. Javier stood still, holding the letter, his heart racing. The mere thought of facing Regina again was daunting. What could she want from him now, after everything that had happened? Part of Javier wanted to refuse, to avoid more painful confrontations, but something inside him, a need to close this chapter, pushed him to accept the invitation. In the days leading up to the meeting, Javier could hardly sleep. The uncertainty of what awaited him left him anxious. He knew this meeting could be an opportunity to seek some kind of resolution, but it could also reopen wounds he was trying to heal. When the day finally arrived, Javier dressed carefully, the weight of the occasion evident in every movement. Upon arriving at the indicated address, an elegant and discreet mansion, he was greeted by a staff member who led him to a cozy living room. The space was tastefully decorated, but there was an austerity that reflected the pain that still lingered in the place. Regina appeared shortly after, her posture rigid, but her eyes revealing a complexity of emotions that Javier couldn't decipher. She no longer seemed like the devastated woman he had found at her house weeks ago, but there was something resolute in her expression that left him apprehensive. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Morales," she said, her voice controlled. "We need to talk." Javier felt a chill run down his spine. He had faced many challenges in life, but nothing had prepared him for what was to come. He knew that this meeting could change everything again, in a way he still couldn't foresee. Regina sat down across from him, her delicate hands resting in her lap. She looked directly into Javier's eyes, and for the first time, he saw something different in those eyes. A mix of pain, yes, but also something more, something he still couldn't identify. "I've thought a lot about everything. About you, about Francisco, about that child," Regina began, her voice sounding softer than he expected. "I lost my husband, Dr. Morales, and nothing in the world will bring him back. But I also know that the pain I feel cannot be your cross to bear alone." Javier didn't know how to respond immediately. Regina's words were unexpected, and he felt his heart tighten with the uncertainty of what was to come. Regina continued, never taking her eyes off him. "I can't change the past, but I can try to find a way for it not to be in vain. That's why I asked you to come here, to discuss something I believe is important for both of us." Javier felt a knot form in his throat. He was about to discover what Regina really wanted from this meeting, and the tension of the moment seemed to saturate the air around them. "I thought of many ways to cope with this loss, and none of them felt right, until I realized that the only way to move forward was to do something meaningful, something Francisco would have supported. And I believe you can be part of that." Regina's words hung in the air, laden with meaning. Javier knew he was on the brink of a new revelation, one that could transform everything he had lived until that moment. The answer to his pain, to Regina's pain, might be there, before them, but the path to reach it would be a challenge he didn't know if he was ready to face. Javier left the meeting with Regina with a whirlwind of emotions in his chest. The conversation they had was a milestone in a journey he had never imagined embarking on. Regina's proposal was something he needed to ponder carefully, as it involved much more than he was prepared to accept at that moment. The days that followed were filled with uncertainties. Regina's proposal had taken root in his mind, growing with each moment of reflection. She wanted to create a foundation in memory of Francisco, dedicated to supporting doctors who, like Javier, followed their instincts and the oath they had taken, even if it meant facing the rigid bureaucracies and the insensitive policies of hospitals. Regina wished for Javier to take the lead of this foundation, using his experience and vision to transform the healthcare system into something more humane and accessible. The idea was undoubtedly noble, but Javier found himself tormented by doubts. He had been fired, judged, and nearly destroyed for following his principles. Was he ready to get involved again in something that could reopen so many wounds? The decision was not simple, but Regina's proposal had ignited a spark of hope, a possibility for redemption, and giving new meaning to everything he had been through. On the morning of the third day after the meeting, Javier woke up with an unsettling feeling, as if something was about to happen. He got up, tried to focus on his morning routines, but a kind of foreboding was haunting him. It was when he looked out the window of his house and saw a scene that made him freeze for a moment. A line of black cars was parked outside, creating an almost surreal image on the quiet street. Javier's heart began to race. The presence of the cars was intriguing, and he felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He quickly got dressed and went down the stairs, heading toward the door with hesitant steps. When he opened the door, he saw several figures getting out of the cars. At the front was Regina Alvarez, accompanied by some people Javier didn't immediately recognize, but who seemed to carry an air of importance. Regina approached with a serene expression, but there was a clear determination in her eyes. "Javier, we came to get your answer," she said, direct and straightforward. Behind Regina, some of the people accompanying her were carrying briefcases and documents, while others, with cameras and notepads, seemed to be journalists. Javier immediately understood that this moment was not just a private conversation, but something much larger. "Regina, Javier began, but Regina interrupted him with a gentle gesture, indicating that he should listen before speaking. "Javier, I have reflected a lot on what we discussed, and I believe that what we are proposing here is more than just a project. It's a new chance, not just for you, but for everyone who believes that medicine should be above politics and money. I understand that this is a big step, but I am sure you are the right person to lead this change." Javier looked at the faces around him, recognizing some of the doctors and healthcare professionals who had been his colleagues in the past. There was a spark in their eyes, something Javier hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. One of the men next to Regina stepped forward and extended his hand to Javier. "Dr. Morales, I'm Miguel Castillo from the Ministry of Health. We are here to offer our full support for this new initiative. We know the system needs to change, and we are willing to work alongside you to make that change happen." Javier felt the weight of responsibility falling on him, but also a renewed strength. The presence of Regina, the healthcare professionals, and even the journalists there at his doorstep was a clear sign that something important was about to happen. It was more than just an invitation. It was a call to lead a transformation. Regina then opened the briefcase she was carrying and showed Javier the foundation's documents. "I want you to be the president of this foundation, Javier. We will start with local projects, but the idea is to expand and reach the whole country. We cannot change what happened, but we can give purpose to this pain." Javier took the documents, his hands slightly trembling, as his eyes quickly scanned the words. He knew this moment was decisive. Accepting meant not only committing to a new phase in his life, but also honoring Francisco Alvarez's memory in a way he had never imagined. The crowd around him seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Javier's response. He looked into Regina's eyes, feeling the gravity of what he was about to do. The decision he would make there could redefine his life and the lives of many others. "I accept," he finally said, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "I accept to lead this foundation and fight for a fairer and more humane healthcare system. If this is what we can do so that Francisco's death was not in vain, then I'm in." Regina smiled, a smile that mixed sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, Javier. Together we will do something grand." The journalists moved forward, taking pictures and jotting down everything frantically. Javier felt a strange calm seeing that. Although the wounds were still fresh, he knew he had found a new purpose, something that could help him move forward. As the black cars began to disperse and the people around him prepared for the work ahead, Javier lingered for a moment at his doorstep, looking at the horizon. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, but he also knew he was ready to face it. Within himself, something had changed. The guilt and fear were still there, but now there was a new flame burning in his chest. The foundation he was about to lead was more than a response to the injustices he had faced. It was an opportunity to rewrite his own story, to transform the weight he carried into something positive, something that could truly make a difference. Javier closed the door to his house with the certainty that, despite everything he had lost, he was about to gain something much greater, the chance to do good in a way he had never imagined. And as he walked to join the others, he felt that at last, he was on the right path to the redemption and peace he had been seeking for so long. We hope you enjoyed this narrative. If this story touched you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional tales that reach the heart. Share your ideas and experiences in the comments. We'd love to know what you think. Feedback and criticism are also welcome. See you in the next emotional video. Until then,